And you're probably already, it's only been one working day, but you're probably already sick of staring at your computer screen. So if you do need to have a break and you're sick of staring at the screen and you want to switch your screen off for a little bit and just listen, and I'm totally okay with that. And also, I want to make sure that what I cover off for you all tonight is exactly what you want to hear, or if you've got any questions along the way. I don't want to save it all to the end, because I totally understand that as I'm talking, there'll be different things that you might think, hang on, I want to know more about that, or I want to drill down a little bit more on that bit of information. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat function. So, I mean, you can certainly heckle me on there if you like, or you can ask me some questions, whatever you like. I just want you to know that I'm here for you. So anything that you want to know or question or challenge me on, then please do throw it into that function. So let me, I guess, give you a bit of a background. Sarah already has done a great intro and covered off a lot of what I have done in my life, including reality TV, which, funnily enough, was kind of one of the hardest things I'd ever done in a 3-month period of time when I actually did the block. But back to sport, and for me, my life revolves a lot around sport now. I'm a retired athlete. I retired 5 years ago, and I've always wanted to be involved in sport. I've always had a connection to sport. But for me, I love that I've been able to make a career out of sport as well. And it's not specifically involved with just netball. So I'm sure you all have your touch points in a sporting club where you know what it's like, you know the connection we get, and you know the feeling that you have when you're involved in a sporting club, and how the impact that you have on people, and also the impact that people have on you. And that's probably what I really want to focus and hone in on tonight, is around this word impact and what it does and what it means, and how we can all, I guess, change and the way we think about the impact that we might be having on people's lives, and what legacy potentially we all want to leave when we walk away, whether it's from a club or from a team or from, you know, retiring from working life. What is it that you want to leave behind, and the impact that you want to have on those people around you? Let me take it way back though for you. I grew up down the Mornington Peninsula, so obviously there's a bit of to and fro as to which is the best side, but I'm going to go with your side just because you're all going to gang up on me if I don't say that. But I grew up down the Mornington Peninsula, and for me, sport was something that I did, but only because everyone else did. And without going into the nitty gritty of why sport and why it was netball, you know, I tried everything, and my parents were just active people. But I think the big thing for me was that I am a very tall girl, and you can't tell that by Zoom. And if I've met any of you before, you'll certainly know this, but I'm 6'2", so I'm 189 centimeters. And I pretty much was this height by the time I was 14 years old. And I went to just a little school down the peninsula, and to be honest, everywhere I went, I wanted to hide. I wanted to stoop down low, and I wanted to, you know, I had terrible posture, all because I was just trying to be like everybody else. I didn't understand back then the power, or, you know, owning your strength, or what makes you unique and what makes you stand out in a crowd. I just had this ability to, I guess, lower my self-esteem every time someone pulled up to me and said, "Oh, you're so tall. How tall are you? Do you play netball? Do you play basketball?" Like, it was just this ongoing conversation that would always happen around me. And I didn't really quite understand how it was making me feel. And so my height was having quite a negative impact on my life. I'm sure you can all relate in different worlds, but the thing for me, and what stood out about playing a sport like netball, was once I finally had a go and followed my friends into that, it was the only place when I was out there on court where I started to feel confident about myself. Where my coach, I had an incredible coach, and it just, you know, aligned at the right time, that this coach in particular would always talk to us about, you know, what we were worried about and what out there on the court would stress us out. And not once did I ever say that it was my height, or that I felt insecure about my height when I was out in the court, because it's such a huge asset, as all of you would know. It's such a huge asset to be tall when you're playing sport. And then that was like the couple of hours on a weekend that I'd get to feel confident. And then for the rest of the week, I'd go back to school and I'd want to hide away. And I'd never want to stand up in public and, be speaking or doing anything like this. I just was a really shy, introverted person until I got out there on the court, and it really helped me understand who I was, but how I could actually have this confidence in what I've been given and what my asset was and what I could actually showcase to the world. Little did I know that at the time. But that's always been my connection to sport. That's why I got involved, and that's why I'm still involved. Obviously, I own my height now, and I got to be a part of a sport like netball where your height, I actually was quite short towards the end. So even when I was in the Australian team, I was coming up against girls who were much taller than I was. So I became one of the littlies, and I got to realize what it's like to walk around and be one of the short ones. But sport for me was the connection and was the impact. And so let me talk to you about my first coach that I had. So she was in her 50s when I first had her. And the reason I want to talk about her is because at the time I didn't realize the impact that she had on me. And it wasn't until like a few years later that I kept moving down. And you'll all know this, in no matter what time you are in your life, you have people around you, and some have a really positive impact on you and others have a really negative impact on you. And some might not even have any kind of impact. But this particular coach for me, she was the one who you could tell that when we showed up to training, and she would say these words all the time, all I care about is that you show up to training. So, we had all these other distractions that could really take us away. But she said, if you show up, that gives me straight away the understanding that you want to be here. If you've had a hard day, that's okay. We can work through that. I just need you to show up first. So already it was almost like she was giving us a tick of approval by just showing up to training. And then, of course, as you all know, it's more than just showing up. It's about the effort that you put in. But she would have us all in a huddle before a training session. And, we're all 12-year-old girls. And so we're all in a huddle and laughing and being silly and giggling. And she would always just have one question to us. And that question for our team was always, what's one thing you want to leave behind today? And that power of what's one thing you want to leave behind was that if you've had a hard day, or if you've got in trouble, or something hasn't gone well for you, she wanted to acknowledge it, that's okay that you talk about and you don't hide away. But she also wanted the whole group to be able to go, okay, Bianca's had a hard day. She wants to leave something behind because, it's affected her today. And we're going to be here at training, and we're going to embrace the fact that she's left it behind and support her through this training session, whether it's, running, having to do those kind of shuttle runs, having to do that Indian file that we used to do around the courts. And her thing was show up, and what's one thing you're going to leave behind? And then she would take us down that route, which is very fashionable now, around the gratitude and what are we grateful for and what are we grateful for within our team. And she was the first person that really stood out to me in that she really wanted a team to stand for something, and she really wanted to have these values and behaviors that we all would have to uphold. And it wasn't that she was strict, and it wasn't that she would put in so much more effort than any other coach. The thing for me for her was that she would just appreciate that we'd shown up and that we were willing to give her that one thing that we wanted to let go so that we could concentrate more on training when she was giving us her time. And so I only got to have this particular coach for a year, because once she had finished, I then kind of went up the ranks really quickly. And I'm certainly not here to take you through all the nitty gritty of my netball career. But I was one of those players that I had to really work hard. So, we know there's, I think, players that are athletically super gifted, and we know there's players that are mentally super gifted. And I was probably more than mentally. I was a bit tough. I was competitive. I knew how to push myself most of the time. But physically, I always had to work really hard. I always had to do so much more training than probably other people in my position once I got older. So I was on this roller coaster ride as an athlete. I wasn't by far nowhere near the best netballer, the best defender. I just had to work my butt off to get there. And so I'm sure you can all relate. Everyone's life is like a roller coaster. You go up, you have great times, you come down, you have really hard times. You get stuck in the middle and you don't know if you want to keep pushing yourself anymore. And that could be at your workplace, or, that could be in the role that you play in a sporting club. whatever it might be, that's our life. And sometimes every day our emotions are going up and down all over the place, and it's really hard to even get control of that. But I just want you to understand that, I guess, no, even though we've got this shiny highlights reel of all the cool stuff we did that Sarah mentioned at the start, and the gold medals and the premierships and all of that is great, but deep down it's all been hard work. And it's probably once I retired that I realized how much you actually put yourself through. And when I reflect back on what that coach initiated for me at the very start as a 12-year-old, was to start that process of having that self-awareness. And so for me, leadership is always about leading from within first. You've got to understand yourself first before you can then go and bring a group of people together and lead a group of people. I mean, you can still do that, but the most powerful leadership for me has been the leaders that really understood themselves and taught us how to understand ourselves better. So that self-awareness piece and that self-management piece is what's probably driven me so much through my career. And so when I've had the ups and downs, and I, at one stage in the Australian team, I made it as an 18-year-old, which, think about, like, as a 12-year-old, I was playing down at Somerville Netball Club. And as an 18-year-old, 6 years later, somehow I'm playing in the Australian netball team over in England. I can't even tell you how that happened. It was one of those kind of aligning moments where one of the players was pregnant, had to have 12 months off. And they thought, you know what, we're going to give this young kid defender a go who's got a bit of potential, and let's put her in there. And so for me, these opportunities have come at different times, but always that coach reminding me, you just have to show up. So even when stuff scares the life out of you, or you're filled with all this fear around, how am I going to push myself through? It's just been about, for me, showing up. And it's been about, for me, understanding every time that I try and show up to something, no matter how much fear is around that for me, it's being able to be aware of what I can leave behind in that moment to be able to get the best, I can't even talk today, and to get the best out of myself. And so leadership and leading from within is a huge part of what I think that we should concentrate on in our own lives, and that self-management of ourselves. So think about it for me now, and this is such a personal thing, and so don't worry, I'm not going to point at you or make you share, although you're all just little squares on my screen. But think about for yourself, if you think about and reflect on the day that you've had today, what's one thing that you'd love to keep, and what's one thing you'd love to leave behind that happened today? Just think about it. You can write it down if you want to. You don't have to tell me what it is, but I'm sure we all have that one thing that we'd leave behind, and that one thing that we want to do tomorrow. And so the reason I'm kind of talking to you about this is because that is what our teams have been based on. All the teams that I got those highlights at the top of that roller coaster were all based around having these strong values and connections with each other, where we could talk about these things. And not every team has been like that, and not every sporting club I've been a part of has been like that. But the ones that get it right, and the ones are the ones that encourage us to be open and to share. And when I went away on that first tour with the Diamonds when I was 18, it was a very different team to the Diamonds that when I finished in 2015. The Diamonds, when I started, it was very much that, I guess, hierarchy leadership, where, the big dogs at the top, who were the captains and the vice captains, the older players who had absolutely dominated their whole career, they wouldn't even talk to us young kids when we were over there. They would barely even say hello to us when we'd go to breakfast at the hotel. And I just remember how that would make me feel. And at the time, again, I didn't realize it, but when I was over there, the way I trained wasn't really that great. I got on court, I played my first test match, but still I wasn't able to push myself the way I wanted to, because I didn't have that care and support around me. And so when I reflect on the player that I became at the end of my career, you kind of grab hold of all those great things that people did who led you or who were around you, and how they made you feel. And if it was a good thing, then you add that to your leadership. But if you've been around things that people that potentially don't make you feel great about yourself, or, you know, they didn't give you the time or day, or they, you know, look down upon you, or, you know, were just a negative energy to be around, that's the stuff you've got to make sure that you don't pass on to somebody else, or you don't kind of do when you're in a leadership position, no matter where you are or what you're doing. And so role models and mentors and supporters and your support crew all play a huge role, because athletes, we get the shiny stuff at the top. We get to celebrate the gold medals and the premierships, and everyone's making a fuss about us. But we have a huge amount of people around us to really acknowledge and support us when we're going through the down part of that roller coaster ride. And so think about too right now the support you have around you, because I know a lot of your roles that you would play are sometimes pretty thankless roles. I don't think you would have many people that are coming up to you saying, thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much during COVID for trying to pivot, as everyone would say, and trying to do things differently and trying to change and trying to make sure we're still connected and we're staying involved. And so if it's not the people that you're leading, it's not the people that you're around, who are the people that are in your support crew that can help you and support you when you need it? And when you're going through that roller coaster ride and you're down here and you just don't know how to get back up, who is it that can help you just get back on track, give you that little push that you need? And that first coach that I've spoken about a lot, she is definitely one of those people who was my mentor early days. And then every year it's sort of evolved and changed. And one mentor that stands out for me now is, or was, Joyce Brown. I don't know if any of you know her. Joyce coached the Australian netball team a long time ago. And she's still a good friend of mine now, but she became that coach for me, who she'd finished her coaching career, but she was always someone that I could reach out to and chat to, and she'd give me a rocket when I needed it, or she'd give me a hug if I needed it, but she was always part of my support crew. And so leaders like that who you have, you've got to make sure that you do attach to them. Does anyone have any questions so far about anything that I'm zooming over? Pardon the pun, but I'm just conscious of time, because I also want to make sure that we have plenty of time to get to Steve Hocking next, because I know he's going to have a lot of gems about leadership. And just while you're doing that, I'll keep going through. And so with the Australian Diamonds, one thing when we started with that team, like I said, the way it was run was very much, unless you're the big dog in the team, you don't really have a say. You don't really say much. You just suck it up, you train, you hopefully get on court and see you later, try and beat out the older girls as they're starting to retire. And you never got on court really unless they were coming to the end of their career. But the biggest transformation that I saw in a team, I was in the Aussie team for about 11 years, and I was in and I got dropped and I got injured, and I had a roller coaster ride just as my Aussie career. But the probably thing that stood out to me was the power again of the people that we had, was that we became part of this group where we had really strong values that took over 12 months to create over time. And once we started to create that, because all of us was starting to think, we don't want to be in this Australian team if it's not going to be something that's fun and enjoyable. And I know you probably think, oh, what pretentious girls if that's their attitude. But when it's your workplace and when it's your environment that, you're a part of this team of 12 girls, and if you're not enjoying it, or it's not a place where you feel supported or comfortable, why would you want to put in all the effort to try and bust you, like you just working your ass off really to try and stay in that team? And it was not a place that felt like it was home. Yet my Melbourne team, Melbourne Vixens, that's where it was more like a family, because everyone had each other's back. So for me, that became a real key thing, that as we were kind of working through our values and behaviours, this would have been about 4 or 5 years into my playing career with the Diamonds, it started to be a bit more like what it was when I was a kid. It started to be more like, okay, we want to listen to everybody in the team. We want to make sure all 12 people in this side have a voice, and that all the staff have an opportunity to talk, that everyone has some buy-in, that everybody has the ability to say what they want to start doing, what they want to stop doing, what they need to keep doing. And that self-assessment started to really be driven into us, that we needed to assess ourselves first, our physical performance, how we were in the team, how we were behaving in a team. And then from then we could move together and go, okay, as a team, then what do we need to do better? I'm just going to take a look at this question. Have you got any tips for optimally balancing the off-field growth, culture and connection versus the on-field strategy? Yes, okay, that is a great one. On-field versus off-field, I actually think it's all got to flow. And I know you all don't have the same amount of time as we do, in that, you know, you're not on tour for 3 weeks with your team. But I think if you have and dedicate some time off the court where you can talk to the playing group, where you can ask them what they want to stand for, and that might not make sense really in context, but it's basically asking the team what they want to get out of it. When the opposition looks at them, what do they want the opposition to see? And if you ask questions like that and have, hopefully you got, even if it's just half an hour, and then have an email going around where you can communicate back and forth with each other, but just some prompting questions. And then that language that you form with each other and those values that you set. So, you know, for us with the Australian team, it was like, okay, we wanted to always be confident. And so when we walked out onto the court, we weren't allowed to be mucking around with each other. We had to be like shoulders back. We're walking out, we're serious, but we never wanted to appear arrogant. And we wanted to make sure that no matter what team saw us, that they knew that we were always going to play tough, but we're always going to have a huge amount of integrity about how we went about it. And we also had this spirit about the Australian way of playing netball. And that was always really tough, but it was always acknowledging that the past players before us have earned us this reputation of being a successful team. We need to make sure we leave it in a better place than we found it. So the off-field discussions are simply asking those questions. And then when you're on court and when you're training or on the field, making sure that you're using the same kind of language. So when you're asking someone to do a drill and you're asking them to put in extra effort, reminding them that, remember, we want to be seen as being confident when we get out there. So by doing this over and over again, that's how we're going to build our confidence. So it's kind of just being able to link both the conversations that you have off field and then on field as well. And I'm saying field and court rolling into one. So I think that's also an important part. But another massive thing that we did within the Australian team and also in Melbourne once we got it going there was to make sure that every single person that's within the team or the club, so let's talk as a club more generally, that rather than just being a player or just being the coach or just being the president or just making sure that everyone had another role to play within the teams. And it takes a huge amount of pressure then off you all as administrators, as presidents, as coaches, if you actually are giving a little bit of acknowledgement to other people that they can have another role within the club if they like. And so what I mean by other roles is I was a player in the Australian team, but then we also had a social committee that was made up of all different members of the team. And it was our job then to organise just different social events that we do together. We had a warm-up team and it was those players' jobs to run the warm-up depending on how the coach was going. If we'd lost a game, then she would take that control back pretty quickly. But then we'd have, a warm-down committee, and we'd heard this story about the All Blacks and that, they're an incredible team over in New Zealand. Worldwide, they'd be one of the best teams going around. And the way that All Blacks operated was they never leave the change room without cleaning it. So it doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter what amazing players they've got in the side, they will always make sure they leave the change room clean. They don't worry about the team manager doing it. The athletes will all clean that change room. And so giving them that purpose and giving them a role that they have to play away from just doing their job on the court or the field, I think is really important. And that's another way to help, I guess, build that team away from just being a team of players. Give it when you have some off-field chat time, give that to the team. All right, okay, we all want roles. Is it someone going to make sure the drink bottles are filled up before training? Is someone going to make sure we picked up all the strapping tape after training? They can be not pointless jobs, but they can be really like thankless jobs as well. But by actually having them written down, and you change them every week if you need to, but give it to other people to delegate those kind of roles, the people that you trust and know who are born leaders within that group, and allow them to then have a bit of buy-in to the leadership themselves. Because we all would do it on our own individually, but when we're in a team, we tend to go, oh, someone else will do that for us, and we get distracted and we think, oh yeah, we don't need to worry about that because I've got this to do. But if it's a significant role that they've been told they need to play, other than just playing goal attack, then it's something that they will hopefully stand up and own. And so by no means is any of this easy. It takes time, and it takes conversations, and it takes effort. But definitely as a whole club, I reckon that's when it becomes more powerful, that within one club, being able to have the same language spoken across the football to the netball, and being able to get everyone on board. And by no means does it mean everyone does this perfectly all the time, because we never did it perfectly all the time. But if majority did it, then it's a power of numbers. So if you can get majority of the playing group and the coaches speaking the same language, then all the younger people, all the ones that aren't quite sure whether they're on board or not, they need to make a choice. They either come on board or they tend to miss out, because they've got this movement of a group moving forward, and the others will be left behind unless they decide to get on board. So I don't want to bombard you with all of this, but I also feel like it's something that when you start the conversation, when you start that understanding about, we all can play a different role within this team, and we can all help this club in some way, everyone will be missing sport more than ever this year. Especially in Victoria, it's been such an interesting time. We don't want to harp on 2020, and we don't know what's going to happen in 2021. But the one thing that we all miss, and the one thing we all love, is that connection that we do have with each other that sport brings us. And never before has it been taken away from us, and we haven't had the choice of whether we wanted to play or not. So it's a really powerful time, I think, this year, to be able to change how you do things and change how you talk about things, and work together, and knowing that you've got your own individual support crew too, but changing that language around how you want to do things. And you ask athletes, or ask players, ask other coaches within your club, what kind of leaders do they want to actually be? Do they want to be empowering? Do they want to be a positive energy? Do they want to be strict? There's no right or wrong to it, but even you having that understanding around the type of person they are can be really powerful too. And as we move on, I think that's more and more the roles that you play. I'd love to hear more about that. And, if there are any kind of, I understand what I'm saying is probably not always possible and easy, but yeah, tell me what other kind of roles you play, and how you might think that could work within your team. Thanks, Lisa. Oh yeah, great. Yeah. Let me try and think, Lisa, of other things that we would ask ourselves. Okay, so in terms of behaviours, so think about behaviours around, being on time to training, and especially a really huge one right now, or even when I played 5 years ago, was around how much we were spending time on our phones. And it might seem so insignificant, yet it's so important to have the conversation. So we would say, okay, as a team, what behaviours do we want to keep up? What behaviours do we like from each other? And they'll say things like, I really like when you encourage me, or I really like when we're kind of laughing and having a great time, and I really like when we're all talking to each other, and I really like, they'll come up with a list of things that they really like. But then what is it that we want to stop, that we want to really eliminate from our club, the way we behave? What are those kind of things? And they will come up with different things, I imagine, that's around, potentially it's that dropping your shoulders when things don't go your way, or, maybe talking back to the umpires. There'll be little things that will creep in that they'll say. And then what are things that we really want to work on this year? And rather than having lists of 10, 20 different things, making sure that you just focus on maybe 3. So 3 things that you all want to keep, 3 things that you all want to eliminate, and then 3 things that you want to work on together as a group. You can do that within your teams. You can do that within a whole club. But making sure that's how you kind of set your values. And so what I was talking about with mobile phones and social media, we had to set some rules as a club and as an Australian team. And this sounds, we're all adults, but we had to set rules in that if we had, if we were going to a mealtime, if we were going to breakfast, lunch or dinner, we were not allowed to have our phones on us, because the whole art of having a conversation and being able to get to know each other, we couldn't do it because we all had to have like heads stuck in our phones and uploading stuff to Instagram and laughing at something else that someone else posted. And it just became such a huge distraction for us. But including some little rules that your team all agree on and get them to come up with them as well, really do help. And we know social media can be such a powerful tool, but it can also be quite a negative one that people get really, really funny about. And we would have girls who would get upset. And again, we're all adults, but we'd have girls who are in their 20s and they were getting upset because so-and-so posted a photo on her social media that she didn't approve and she didn't like how she looked. And so, even as adults, we were going through all of these and needed some rules in place to try and prevent it. So you couldn't post a photo of somebody else unless you got their permission first. And it might seem really petty, but this certainly, the fact that we actually had the conversations about it, that is what enabled us, I guess, to bring it in and to go, okay, well, that can become one of our rules that we're going to bring in this year, is that we're not going to do that, or we're going to make sure that you seek permission. So we had a bit of a social media policy and a phones policy. And even to the uniforms, like we always wanted to represent Australia, not just on the court, but also we wanted to represent Australia in how we looked and how we dressed and the brand that the Australian netball team has. And so that, we all had to make sure we were in the same uniform all the time, and we always traveled in the same uniform. So we looked the part and we looked how we wanted people to see us. And it's not a superficial thing. It's more just the fact that we wanted to be proud of the uniform that we were wearing. All right, any tips for young kids getting back into sport after the year break from COVID? Yeah, Aaron, great question. I mean, for me, I think you're going to have your athletes or your players that are going to be super competitive and just want to get out there, and they've been really missing it. And you're going to have different players that potentially have lost a bit of the love for it too. And they're like, oh, do I want to come back? And you're going to have a whole mix of different people. And I mean, for me, I think what I'd be conscious of is that, just taking it easy the first few sessions where you all get back together, and being able to have a bit of time where you're getting together as a group and doing some fun things when you're out there, whether it's training for footy or netball, but not always doing super competitive stuff straight off the bat, because some people that will be quite exhausting if they haven't been able to do any fitness work away from or last year. So I think you just have to be quite mindful of how everybody's kind of come in and what their approach is. And potentially that's a great opportunity to set up the season. I'm not sure where you all are at with it at the moment, but, to have a conversation around how everyone's feeling and, what did they love and what did they hate about 2020? And even as a coach of a team, write it down and keep reminding them of it. Because I know for me, 2020, it was interesting. It was hard at times. Like a lot of the work that I do wasn't there, and it was a real, shock at the start. But now I walk away from 2020 and think it was a real blessing for me, because I learned to stop and I learned to say no to things, and I learned to actually just enjoy time away from being busy. And I was addicted to being busy. And so it's been great for me now, once I started to work again. But it's been great for me now to understand that. And I kept saying to my partner, Mark, I'm like, you need to keep reminding me whenever I'm getting frazzled and saying yes to too much and, filling up my days really quickly, that I loved not being busy last year. And so I need to keep that at the front of my mind. So definitely ask. I think there's no harm in over communicating. So ask everybody and start that conversation to see how they're feeling and what they want to leave behind and what they want to keep from last year. Okay, Jessie, sometimes club values, mission statements can seem a bit corporate, meaningless. Yes, agree, but they can be so valuable. Yep. giving real meaning to these values. Yeah, so we've all probably, whether it's in a workplace or a sporting team, had values and behaviors and a motto or a trademark, blah, blah, blah. And we all like hear the words and go, yep, 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 great. And right at the time, because we've been a part of it, or if you were a part of creating those words, you probably have a little bit more love for them. But if you've just come into a team and someone shoved them in your face and said, oh, we want to be committed, we want to be determined, we want to be relentless, you're like, oh yeah, cool. So I think how you add meaning is that, one, they have to be part of the conversation that always happens. So they have to be constant words that you talk about and bring up. So whether you've been at the club for 10 years or you've been there for a week, you are hearing them all the time. And if they're set in stone trademarks and mottos that the club have had forever, then it's definitely got to continue to be part of the conversation. But if every year it's something like resetting your values and you know, coming up with new ones, then you've got to make sure that everyone has buy-in to it. Because if you don't have buy-in to it, then you find it really hard to get on board it. It's like anything in life. We all want to have our own little ownership of that space. So any way that you can help everyone own it, even if it's to have the values that are already there and already been created, even if it's just to have a discussion around what does being committed actually mean to us in this team this year? Is it different to what it meant last year? So even just having that as part of a conversation where let people say, you know what, committed to me actually means that I can show up 75% of the time or whatever. Hopefully it's not that. But yeah, have that discussion, throw it out there, use those words, use the trademark. Our trademark for the Australian Diamonds is Sisters in Arms, and it might sound really corny to you all, but Sisters in Arms, that's came about because for us, it was about the most powerful position that we are in as a team is when we are standing on that transverse line and we are arm in arm, linking arms around each other. It's not just the 7 of us that are going on the court, it's all 12 of us that are standing on that transverse line with all of our staff. And we're stand there facing generally New Zealand or England, and we sing the national anthem. And it's about before the game, so it's not about what's about to happen or what's happened during a game. It's about that moment where anything can happen, that we've got each other's back, no matter what, no matter who's on the court, no matter who's off, that we are in this together. And so that's why Sisters in Arms came about. Now, when we started talking about that, the commentators who were ex-players for Australia at the time, they then would hear us say it in our huddle and they started to mock us on the coverage and be like, oh, Sisters in Arms, that's really corny. Like the girls just need to go out there and play and stop worrying about this stuff. And the reason they were saying that is because we'd not brought them along for the ride. We'd not told them that it meant to us, you know, the people that had stood on the transverse line before us. You know, we wanted to acknowledge the work they'd done in the past, and we wanted to make sure that we left the team in a better position. And it wasn't until we started to bring, you know, the past players in and so they understood it, that they would back it in. So, you know, words can mean anything unless you actually give them meaning. And so by giving them meaning, I think that's when it can be really a powerful thing. So that's definitely how we started to own it and has started to get the wider community of Australian netballers to own it as well. Vital component is the leadership modelling by coaches and administrators. Yes, absolutely. The leadership modelling, you know, it's an interesting one. Everyone leads very differently. But again, I believe it's being able to understand and have that self-awareness and being able to have that time to reflect and understand how you can manage yourself. And then you'll be in a much better position to go out there and to lead others. Now, I just am mindful because I know Steve Hocking is jumping on too very soon. So if there's any final questions before I wrap up, if you do have anything else, send them through to Sarah. She'll email them to me. I'm more than happy to keep chatting about this offline if any of you do have any extra questions, because yes, I love talking about it. I think it's such a powerful thing. And sport is a huge connector for all of us. And so I feel very grateful that I've had the career that I have had in sport, not just as a player, but now just getting to work in and around all different sports. I absolutely love it. Any questions before we finish up? Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bianca. I think everyone got a lot out of that chat. As you mentioned, if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to contact me and I'll get in contact with Bianca. But yeah, thank you so much for jumping on tonight. It worked very well that it was a virtual event and you could jump on tonight. So thank you again. I'm sure everyone who was on, as you can see in the chat, there's a few thank yous in that coming through from our club. So yeah, just again, thank you very much for jumping on and being part of our game plan event tonight. So thank you.
No worries. Great job organising. And I mean, look at us. We've all adapted to the virtual world. Now we can do this anywhere.
Exactly. Thank you so much. All right. So Steve has jumped on. So I will get straight into introducing Steve tonight. So our second speaker tonight is Steve Hocking. Steve played 199 games for the Geelong Cats between 1984 and 1994, known as a back pocket specialist. Steve has held roles of general manager at the Geelong Football Club and now holds the role of AFL general manager of football operations, as well as a member of the AFL exec. We are very grateful and looking forward to hearing from Steve tonight. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Have you got me okay?
Yes, definitely do.
This online world that we're all living in, it's quite different.
Very different.
And how disciplined was Bianca, finishing right on time as well?
I know, very good.
Super impressive. That's all her sporting background. Now, I've been given the topic of leadership tonight. I think Bianca touched on that, and I'm mindful, how long have I actually got? Is it about 45?
Yep, 45 minutes. Yep.
Yeah, so I think it's really important, rather than me just talking to the audience online here, it would be great to take some questions at a point in time as well. So just feel free to send them through, and we'll do our best at answering them. I'm sure there's many questions about 2020 and how the AFL actually steered their way through. I firstly just wanted to kick off about leadership and what it means to me personally. I think leadership, the word leadership stands for influence. That's how I respond when I hear the word leadership, and influence is in my personal view how you bring others and empower others to be the best they can be. So that's certainly really important in the way that I operate within my current role and any role that I've actually held over time. One of the early learnings for me, how I got to that understanding, was I was actually appointed vice captain down at Geelong in the early 90s. I think it was about 1991. And Andrew Bewes actually did his ACL, and very quickly I found myself thrust into being acting captain for the remainder of the season. And one of the things that I actually did, being younger at that time, and not necessarily having people to mentor me and around me at that time, was I actually took the captaincy role on and felt that I needed to change who I was, rather than recognising that I was actually promoted to that level of responsibility because of how I went about playing and how I went about integrating in the group and the influence I had. I actually thought at that time, being quite young, that it was really about me living up to that standard, and part of that was actually changing who I was within that position. And so I learned very quickly that's not the case. And I've been on this journey since, where I've continued to learn right throughout. So yeah, so to kick off, leadership influence is really important to me. One of the big things that I found over time is the inner dictator. And let's be honest, most of the people that are on this call will be in leadership roles in some capacity. You know, whether you're a volunteer at a club, my experience with volunteers is that they care so much and care so deeply that just the slightest sentence ill-directed can really offend them, because they just take it to heart, because what they're actually involved in is so important to them. They want to actually care for that beyond even some of the leaders in their eyes can often do. And so the inner dictator, it's that part of ourselves that rushes to protect our beliefs and points of view. And, you know, we need to be mindful of that. We all have that in us. We have to work hard to keep that voice at bay, which I often do. So it's really about, Bianca talked about reflecting. taking the time to reflect. That's how you keep that voice at bay. Question our assumptions, because we're very good at jumping to assumptions. I'm as guilty as anyone. And be open-minded enough to rethink what we thought we knew, and to help others do the same. So that's actually what leadership is. It's creating an environment where you're constantly reflecting. Overthrowing our inner dictator will allow us to keep learning for the rest of our lives, and that's really important. To build an organisation where rethinking can happen, leaders need to foster an environment that emphasises learning over short-term performance. And we're really guilty of this. Like one of the things that I found in my roles at Geelong early days was the players actually brought Brian Cook in at one point in time. This is when Jared Murphy, who's actually now landed at North Melbourne, in a similar role all these years later, they're trying to reinvent themselves and reset themselves and recast themselves as a prominent organisation. But back when Jared showed up at Geelong, which is about 2007, and we all know the history of that, one of the things that happened was the players got tired of key leaders coming in after a loss and actually behaving really poorly off the back of that. And so there was this emotional roller coaster that was being created all the time. And one of the things that they wanted the club to do was reset itself and actually calibrate itself on longer term goals. So, an environment that emphasises learning over short-term performance is essentially what we did at the Geelong Football Club. And what we found was, that the best performances were coming off that longer-term planning. We weren't sweating the small stuff from week to week. A couple other things to add around the inner dictator. Be wary of best practices. It's really important, this. Best practices, which actually can discourage us from looking again at what we think works. Instead, always aim for better practices. One of the things with best practices is, and I've heard this quite often with the state government, we've got best practice. It's like you're putting a full stop on where you can go. Apparently, you've got the best in the world, but evidently we actually haven't. And so better practices is a continuum. It's about continuing the growth of what we're doing and continuing to learn. So really, really important that. Always aim for better practices, particularly in community clubs. This one's really important, and this is something I hold very, very high on the scale of leadership. Build an atmosphere of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable raising concerns and voicing different perspectives. That is critical. If you want to empower your people, you need to create that environment where that can actually be harnessed. And if you do, your environment, your workplace, your community clubs will thrive. People will feel welcome, they'll feel heard, and not every idea is going to get over the line. Not every argument is going to turn into something productive. But what it will do, if people feel safe, they'll actually raise it. And you'll always get the opportunity to understand what is happening in your club. One of the biggest gifts I've learned is that I have an open door policy in any of the roles that I've had. And the reason for that is because if I have that, I have the ability to tap into the heart and soul of what is going on in a program, what is happening with our people. And you can pivot things that are potentially heading down a path you don't want them to really quickly, because you've actually got your finger on the pulse. And you don't do that by marching in, the inner dictator that I just touched on. You do that by placing information, influencing decision-making, walking the corridors, walking the floors, and connecting with your people. In my view, that is one of the key things in being an influential leader. The other one, and the final one on this, is sort of keep track of rethinking. Instead of just rewarding outcomes, which we're all guilty of, we all love an outcome. I mean, in football, we're absolutely driven by outcomes. You need the discipline. Instead of just rewarding outcomes, also take note of how different options are debated throughout the process. We did that right through 2020, and we're doing that again in 21. We're taking note of how different options are debated throughout the process, because in that, maybe a gold nugget. And it also means you've got this beautiful learning environment that, that you're continuing to enhance. The other thing that I'd say, if there was ever a time when the past won't predict the future, it's now. Whether it's battling the pandemic, taking on climate change, transforming our organisations, or even working to heal a polarised society in which people are deeply wedded to their views, the times we're living in call for mental flexibility and agility more than ever before. Now more than ever, we need to question our assumptions and think again. So that inner dictator, as I highlighted at the start, is in all of us. Be honest with yourself, because it's there. It's the reason why we end up in, often in positions of leadership, because we have the ability to influence. But our role is to make sure that we sit and float across the top and dive in where we need to and empower our people. I'll just stop there for a minute and just pause and just take any questions that have just sort of come up through this period. Just having a look there. So have you got any tips for leaders to use emotion the right way when making decisions, but not be clouded, overburdened by it? I think the really important part of that, it's a great question. Our role as leaders is to make sure that we're actually parking the emotion. One of the things that we did at Geelong was when I first started there in 2006, we had it sitting in the coach's box. The level of emotion that was in the decision making was just out of control. And what was happening was it escalates as it goes down through the headphones, the headsets, and to the bench. And then everybody else then goes up another level on top of that as well. And then that gets overlaid on the players. And so we actually set up like a business model whereby there was certain people that were actually responsible for certain decision making, and whether that be around medical, whether it be around performance, whether it be positional moves. We actually made sure that people knew what their responsibility was in the coach's box game day, so that we didn't have this cutting across one another and just total chaos. And off the back of that, it just all dropped a whole nother level, and the players then elevated above that and felt like they were in charge. Now, one of the things coming to the AFL, one of the first things I did was we have match day coaches for umpires, and they get a nice suite at the best grounds and the best seats and the best views, and they're all mic'd up. And so I would go in and actually sit in the box, learning from this Geelong experience and going, oh, this is just chaos. So you'd actually have retired umpires who were coaching. And what they were doing was they actually had feedback right through to the on-field umpires, and they were overlaying their emotion as to what they were seeing in the game to those umpires that were actually out on the field. And so we actually had to unpack all of that and get it set up in a system whereby that wasn't happening any longer. The guys on the field are in charge, certainly at quarter time, half time, and three-quarter time. Deliver your messages then, but don't be doing it during live whilst the games are going. And then when it got to finals, oh my goodness, it blew my head up as to just how crazy it got during finals time. The umpires, the retired umpires, had this anxiety level that they were overlaying onto these field umpires and boundary umpires and goal umpires. So we had to unpack all of that. That is what our motion does. So it's really important to, I think, when you're going into a meeting, you have an agenda. You understand within that meeting what are going to be the triggers within that agenda that may raise the emotion. So you've actually got a framework that you're operating in. Understand the people, the audience that you're going to be talking to, and then deliver it in a way with a lot of empathy. And also try and understand the other point of view. That's really, really important. That I ran a retail business for a number of years, and I used to tell my staff all the time, when a disgruntled consumer comes in, it's up to you to flip from the problem to the solution. And that's all in language. if we take the time as leaders to listen to what people are saying and what they're sharing, the answer is in what they're sharing all the time. That's been my experience across many different roles. What have we got there? Do you have any thoughts on having to make a decision which you know is going to be unpopular? Oh yes, put the helmet on and the iron undies. I pack those regularly, particularly in this AFL role. Staring down people like John Longmire, Damien Hardwick, Alistair Clarkson, Luke Beveridge, and the list goes on. I've done that many, many times. Look, I think the advice on that is if you've consulted wide and you feel like you've brought people on the journey, and Bianca said this early in her piece around having a purpose within a club, having a mission statement within a club, it is up to you. You're the leader and you want to be the influencer. How you influence is you bring those people in and you bring them on a journey. Now, you will always have, at the start of the year, at the start of 2020, we set up little work groups. And in those work groups, we had Alistair Clarkson, we had Adam Simpson, we had Damien Hardwick involved in a range of different things. And they were really pleased to be part of it and contributed. When they stopped contributing, it was because they thought by them coming onto those work parties that their ideas were going to be adopted. No, that's not the way it works. You're part of a group that are actually considering a range of things. And then the governing body over and above that will take that and actually then work with that. And you have to stare into that. It's not easy, but if you know, I sleep very, very easy most nights knowing that I've actually brought people on the journey. Another great example would be taking you back to the major rule changes we made when I first got to the role. We spent all of 2018, I visited every senior coach 3 times in that year, which believe me is a difficult thing to do. They are the busiest human beings on earth, senior coaches. And so I got 3 individual visits across the season with them. At the end of the season, once all of the heat had come out of it, Premier had been announced, 2 weeks after that, we got all 18 senior coaches into a building in Melbourne, BCG offices, and we took them through all the changes and where we had landed after all the consultation over the whole year. And then we got into March of 2019, and we had a breakfast, Gil and I, leading into the start of the season, and they all stared me down and said, "You haven't consulted at all on any of these." And that's what sort of happens. Now, I felt very, very comfortable standing up in front of that group, knowing we couldn't have done anything more than what we'd done. So I think it's really important that what you do is you overlay what you believe is right, and then you stick true to that, and you'll sleep much easier. Sometimes it'll be unpopular. As I said, just put the helmet on, the iron undies, and you'll get your way through it. Any other questions that are coming through there? There've been a couple of good ones. A couple of other things I wanted to touch on. Everybody has their own style. And I think it's really important that what you do is you live, to those, who you are and what you want to represent. And for me, there's a couple of words that are really important to me, and I make sure that I wrap these 3 words into most of my decision making on a regular basis. Authenticity. I think that's crucial for me to operate. I'm not overlaying this on anyone. I'm just encouraging you to make sure that you've got some cornerstones that you go back to, so that whatever meeting you're attending, you're not flip-flopping around. They actually get used to how you operate. And for me, I've found that very successful. There's a style and a way that you operate, and they actually become accustomed to that. So authenticity, humility is really important to me. I'm more than happy to own the failures within my role, and that's really important as a leader. You absolutely make sure that you own those and you get out in front of it. And then wherever there's success, you just push that to the team. It's critical that. And so I think that's where humility kicks in a big way. And then the other one that I think is really important, particularly for me, is just empathy. Understanding where you've come from, understanding what our sport means to so many people. If you think about what you've been through over the last 12 months, what every single person has been through, it's actually understanding that that's been difficult for most people. Even having this type of session is difficult because you're actually not in a room together. We're creatures that like to have that contact. I hadn't been inside AFL House at Docklands. I went back in there 2 weeks ago on a Monday. That's the first time my team had been together in 11 months inside Docklands. We ran 2 competitions for 11 months without having that contact. I didn't see Gil. Gil and I had no contact from the middle of March until post the grand final. So when the siren blew, grand final, we met on the ground and we shook hands and hugged at that point. That is the first time right through that whole season that we'd actually had any physical contact. So you can do things. There's absolutely, we're capable of so much as people, particularly if you care about sport as much as, what we all do. That's why we're invested so heavily in it. There's a question that's come through there. What was the biggest challenge that you faced with last season, and what things do you put in place for you to navigate around them? Look, the biggest challenge for last season was just continuing the game. It was so difficult to try and navigate all of the different COVID implications. One of the things that we found last year, we had a safe harbour. And the safe harbour was Queensland. Already the difference in 2021 is we don't have a safe harbour. Every state now is trading off the political capital that comes with locking a border down. It means you get longer as the premier of that state. People want their state ring-fenced from other states. And so that's become quite difficult for us. We had up to 2 or 3 days notice because of relationships that we had with governments as to what might be in the pipeline. We've used all that goodwill up. That's not available to us now. Sport has really been pushed down heavily off the back of the Australian Open. I don't think the governments have really felt that supportive of a group of overseas athletes landing at our shores and bringing in a heap of COVID along with it. And we now find ourselves sort of locked down off the back of that. So we've used up a lot of goodwill, and one of the things that we're doing for 2021 is we've generated a traffic light system, and this might be helpful as far as AFL Barwon executives. That traffic light system is set up, quite clearly. The red is high risk, and then you go back to amber, and down to green. And across that, you've got the COVID elements. You've got the restrictions around whether you can play or not, and what that, and then the flow on as to what it means to all the teams and all the people involved. So we're working off that type of model, and the reason we're doing that is because we're finding that the clubs need a level of certainty, and again, I would imagine that's the case with AFL Barwon. We, right through last year, and we'll continue to do this, we over-communicated. Every opportunity we got, we over-communicated. It was just, it was mind-boggling how often we're meeting with CEOs, GMs of football, and senior coaches. It wasn't, monthly, it was weekly, and for a whole period of time there, it was daily. We're meeting with them because we're trying to bring them on the journey. It was really about trying to shape the competition and making sure, and these people are full-time, compared to what you're dealing with. It's not easy to get a whole range of people from diverse backgrounds to understand and accept what you might be wanting to do. So, over communication was a really important thing that we did, and it's something we'll continue. But the traffic light system this year, and also getting out ahead of it. We always had these plans. We had we had so many plans. You know, we had, I reckon at times we got up as many as 30 different action plans that, you know, levers that we could pull to make sure that the season kept going. We did that for a host of reasons. Some people said it was largely revenue driven. When we got back from Queensland after the grand final, we were inundated of thanks, you know, email upon email, letter upon letter, from people thanking us for keeping the competition going, because it was the only thing in Victoria that sort of broke up you know, COVID for people and the lockdown. And that responsibility wasn't lost on us. You know, we recognised this was really important. It was far greater than you know, any financial gain. It was really about making sure the game kept going, because so many people depended on it. What do we got there? What are your thoughts to build a team's ability to self-regulate and enforce their own team rules? Build a team of leaders and not always rely on the coach to be the boss. Oh, who has sent that one through? Rowan Martin, here. And not always rely on the coach to be the boss. Yeah, I could talk for hours on this one. I'm a massive rat for this. I think coaches have been put on pedestals that are just, they basically need to be knocked out from under people, to be quite honest. Those coaches cannot have the success without people. Every single decision I've made has been based and grounded in people. You know, hire the best people, set up the best environment so they can be the best they can be. Now, you know, a lot of you will think, well, that's easy to say. It's all words. It's actually achievable. And, you know, I think that you do that firstly by, you've got your own set of values as a leader that I spoke to. It's important that you don't just hire people that mirror those. When I say that reflect who you are. The values need to align, but the decision-making has to be different. Understand your weaknesses. You know, I'm not the smartest guy in the building at the AFL, and nor was I at Geelong. But where I was smart was I knew my weak spots and always hired people that were smarter than myself. Right, that's critical. Don't feel like you're going to be threatened by people that might take your job. If they're good enough to take your job, get out of the way and let them take it. That's the type of team you want. And then, you know, make sure that you're actually providing the right tools for them and the right opportunities. An example today, I've got a 2IC who's an absolute star, and I nearly lost him at the start of the year to a club, a GM footy role. And in the end, they mucked him around so much that he decided to stay. So the equation that I had to work through was, okay, he's looked at that. What's going to be important for him to stay motivated, to stay engaged, and make sure that when the next opportunity comes up, he's actually ready to grasp that, or he jumps over me and takes my role. That would be even better. And so today there was an opportunity whereby I had a request to be part of a government working group, which was going to work around our fixture. There was some really high-level key decision-making and planning for 2021. And I got contacted by Gillan, and he said, you know, I'd like you to be part of this. And I just said to him, well, I'd actually like this guy to be part of it. And he said, well, why is that? And I said, because it's about investing in his future. It's about making sure that he had the capability of sitting at that table and learning from those people. So in future, he potentially is the head of the table. And so it was an investment for the future, an investment for the AFL, and more broadly, not just the AFL itself, but also, you know, a club potentially if he ends up there. So, you know, really important that you empower your people and get out of the way. Like, it's just critical. You know, you have to, the inner dictator I started with, you've got to remove yourself from a lot of that and learn when to lean in and learn when to lean out. And more often than not, you know, as your team grows, you'll find yourself leaning out more and allowing them to do the work, and you just float across the top. You know, if you think about that really shiny stone just skimming across the top of a bed of water. That's what you need to be doing. And you only go in and dive deeply where the mentoring and the care needs to go on. But you then pop yourself back up. So, critical that you do that. I've done it now for over 20 years. It works. I did it as a player for 10 years. It works. Hopefully that answers that one. The really important thing as far as the coach, before I leave that one, you can tell it's a bugbear of mine. Important you recruit the right coach. Have that information, have those beliefs up front, outline, identify that these are your expectations, and then recruit accordingly. It's one of Chris Scott's greatest skills, is he actually gets out of the way. Now, at times he'll be criticised because people would like him to be there a fraction more than what he is, but it also empowers so many of them. There's so many guys down and women down there that have got capability of going on beyond what they're currently doing due to that. What advice would you give clubs about the importance of showing strong leadership in regards to diversifying our game, in particular female football and diversity? Great question. Switched on group. I'll provide an example that what we've done. So we needed to clearly trim the tree at the AFL. One of the biggest bugbears of mine, and I think Matt Gibson's got a question coming up. Gibbo and I have spoken about this numerous times. The AFL was becoming just a gigantic monster, gobbling everything within its, within its pathway. And one of the things that we've tried to do is, if you think about an inverted pyramid, that is where we ended up. The widest part of the pyramid was the AFL. The skinniest part was becoming community football. And one of the things that I openly talk to, and more than happy to share with this audience I'm going to, is that I feel really strongly about where I've come from. And part of that is, a young 17-year-old journey from Cobram to Geelong as a 17-year-old, and the bottom of the pyramid being the biggest part as that 17-year-old, and then the VFL being the pointy part, and we completely inverted it over time, and that's all because of money. We got so fat at the top that we needed to flip it back the other way, and that's actually what we've done. We've actually pulled. What has been your observations of the leaders of our states and country? Probably politics is not something I want to go into, Gibbo, but I reckon I touched on it earlier. I'm mindful of time. We've got about 10 minutes. Is there any other questions there? Before I sort of wrap things up. Just on that question, Jess, the start of that question around, in particular, female football and diversity, what advice would you give to clubs about the importance of showing strong leadership? We've got to be really, really careful around that language. Language is everything in community clubs, and you need to be quite considered around that. And so strong leadership, what does that look like? Strong leadership for me would be, maybe unapproachable, potentially a bit standoffish. I think that you just need to be careful with that type of language. We want to create an inclusive place. Great question. Do you have to have the loudest voice to be heard? Well, there's a rule that I live by, Benita, and that is that generally in meetings, I'll go and pursue the person that's had the least to say post the meeting, because those cogs are turning and they've spent most of their time listening. So picture this. I've got we set up a comp committee, and on that comp committee, because the way when I first started, we had a laws of the game committee, we had a Hall of Fame committee, we had about 10 different committees, and no one was talking to one another, and most of the information never found its way through to the key decision makers in the executive and commission. So we disbanded all those, and you know, they were nice seats that people were warming and, you know, gave them a bit of credibility, but by and large, the decision-making was going nowhere. We created a competition committee. And one of the things that we did was we actually set that up in a way where 12 of the 18 clubs are represented on that comp committee. And they're everyone from president's chairs to CEOs, GMs of football, senior coaches, and also current day players. And they actually have direct access to what we're developing with the game. Because our job is, my job is to care for the game and make sure it's still there in 100 years' time and it hasn't been, you know, completely taken over by coaches and it all of a sudden looks like rugby or soccer or some other invasion sport from overseas. I mean, you know, the great thing about our game is it's got certain elements that need to be protected, and you know, we've got to be mindful of that, and I'm very, very mindful of it. On that committee, we set it up in a way whereby we actually had some of the loudest voices, and that was a deliberate approach. One of those voices was Eddie Maguire, that we actually had on that committee. Now, Eddie would show up. We'd have 4 committee meetings a year. Eddie would show up, and I raise his name because it's topical at the moment. He would come to every session, and he'd have at least 12 ideas. And of those 12, you know, maybe 1 or 2 would be okay. The thing I would say is with the 12 ideas, it would actually promote thinking and openness for the rest of the group to actually think differently. And it was deliberate from my point of view to add those louder voices. So it's understanding what that loud voice brings and how best to, I chair the meeting, so how best to chair the meeting so that, yes, they're certainly heard, but other people have the platform to be heard as well. So it's actually making sure that you're putting full stops and pauses where you need to in meetings and allowing some of those quieter voices that you actually want to hear from, because they've actually taken the time to listen, and then just, you know, doing it in a respectful way, never throwing anyone under the bus. Again, having that empathy and influence within those meetings. I've always found conflict is healthy, managed well. I'm a huge believer in that, but it has to be managed well. It can't be personal. It can't wander into an area of, disrespecting another individual or their thoughts. And so, again, that's where the chair needs to manage that and manage it well, because out of well-managed conflict comes some of the greatest ideas. We hired a couple of guys, a couple of high-performance managers at Geelong in 2007, took us through 2007, 2008 and 2009, a 2-time premiership high-performance managers. We deliberately went for 2 because it gave us the ability to have different thinking rather than one person running off with all these ideas and it never being sort of sense checked against someone else. They were so opposite. I managed the 2 of these guys, and the way it worked was one would come in at 6 a.m. in the morning. His first email would be to me at 6:01 every morning for 4 years he was at the club. And then by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he'd be a mess in the corner, totally exhausted. But on that journey, he'd taken everybody with him, absolutely on the journey. We hadn't employed him at this point in time. I took a flight to Adelaide to interview the guy. And when I landed at Adelaide Airport, I switched my phone back on, and the first message to pop up was this guy. And the message was, I'm waiting out the front. I'm in a silver ute. I'm here to pick you up. I teed up to meet him at a cafe in Glenelg, and I was just catching a taxi there. And so we didn't even bother going to the cafe. I just pulled him back into the airport and said, when can you start? My thought at the time was, if this guy was prepared to do this for me, what was he going to do for players? So that's what he did for the whole 4 years he was there. He just cared for people and took them to the next level. The second guy we employed to sit alongside this guy, he didn't start until 10 o'clock every day. His final email would come to me at 10 o'clock at night. So the first guy was at 6:01 and the last guy was at 10 o'clock at night. And between the 2, they just worked together. It was yin and yang, and it was quite deliberate, the approach. They were so opposite, but it just worked. One had strength and power, the other one had aerobic capability. So, you know, be mindful of that. Don't always think you've got to have the same people sitting at the table. You've got to have different voices and different thinking and different input. It stimulates your thinking, and then you have to have the ability to manage all of that. I think that's about it. I'm conscious of time, 3 minutes to 8. Just to wrap it up, Bianca talked about values and behaviours. Really important that you actually consider that. You know, each of your programs, I find that people align in behind that really well, but they need to feel like they've actually contributed to it. So always take the time to, you know, don't set and forget those things. I sort of look at it in a way that you need to be refreshing those sort of every year. You might have, you know, a certain element of it that strings it all together year on year, and there's continuity in that. And then you're playing sort of around the edges as new people are coming into your system. Always understand your audience. So, you know, your clubs will go through phases. You'll be quite a young club at times because you've got a lot of young families that are flowing in, and then they'll grow into staunch supporters and be there for a longer period of time. And that's really important as well. But how do you continue to, you know, refresh and make sure that you've got this continuous, you know, goodwill and people in your club and your community? How do you set them up as a community? The other thing I'd say to you is churches are well gone. And I don't want to offend anyone on the line who are religious, but my point on this is that sport has become the religion through so many communities. It knits communities together. There's so many things that are happening across, you know, so many communities that are challenging, you know, financial strain, you know, financial hardship, you know, suicide, health and well-being and so forth. It is critical that we recognise that. And so the place, yes, you want to win games of football. Yes, you want to win games of netball. Yes, you want to have absolute success as premiers, but take your turn at that. The best thing to do is to have that long-term goal, not the short-term goal, of a club that's inclusive, a club that's set up like a community. If you ever get any funding from government, don't just put it into football. Put it in so it brings senior citizens in. Put it in so it brings all elements of your community in, so it becomes a beacon within your community. And you will find it so easy if you set it up that way, because it actually then warms the hearts of people and they actually want to be part of your club. That's it from me. Thanks for listening. I hope I haven't bored you too much. Hope you've got something from it. Wish you all the best of luck in 2021 and just, you know, acknowledgement for all the hard work that you do. It does get recognised, even at our level where I'm sitting. It's talked about a lot. It's certainly with me.
Thank you so much, Steve, for being with us tonight. I'm sure the clubs did get a lot of information, a lot of tips, a lot of tricks and things from you tonight, and just some really valuable information. It's been a fantastic first night for us to kick off our game plan and to have both Steve and Bianca here tonight. So yeah, thank you so much at short notice jumping on and being part of our game plan tonight.
No problems.
I'll just quickly, just to wrap up with everybody, just want to point out that for the rest of the week, we still have some fantastic sessions coming up this week. Tomorrow night, we do have our COVID-19 session with AFL Barwon staff, also with representation from Netball Vic and AFL Vic, a part of that session as well. We have Rochelle I'm presenting on participation, recruitment and retention. And then throughout the week, we have Leisure Networks jumping on board to help us with facility planning and grant writing. And then to finish off the week, we have Tarek, which is going to go over club respect, and Rana to go around being a more inclusive club. So if you still haven't jumped onto those sessions, jump onto the AFL Barwon website. It has the schedule on there, plus the link to jump on and register for more sessions. But thank you everybody for jumping on for our first night. It's been fantastic to get the game plan kicked off for 2021, and we look forward to seeing you throughout the week. So thank you. Have a good night, everyone.